writing for publication can have significant personal and professional value for professionals in many fields. In this program, Dr. James Hartley, an expert on academic and professional writing, engages in a discussion with a graduate student and a recent graduate on ways of overcoming writing challenges, using writing to accomplish professional goals, and getting the most from your writing.
Jim, I'm interested in how you get from a conference presentation, which I found reasonably easy to do, through to an article, which I find myself regularly not doing.
Well, I would probably start by writing the paper, and then you can send the paper off for publication, but you can, the difference between the two is that the conference paper may seem easier, but it's easier because you've done all the work, and it's to be spoken and said.
Yes.
And that kind of language is different from writing to be read.
Yes.
Whereas a conference paper is written to be spoken. And it's easier to do that. But I think it's easier to do it when you've got it all in front of you, as it were. Going the other way, if you write a short piece for the conference, which is a common procedure, and then you'd have to try and change its modality, which is harder to change from speech to written, I would think, and you have to extend it and amplify it, and it becomes a bit of a difficult thing to do. I would try writing it with everything in it that you think you're going to need, and then select from that and turn it into speech. I, we did this, we found. It's not the case that's too pretentious. We didn't find. You know, sort of that kind, and speak it out loud. You find it comes more easily.
Can I just ask you, Ian, why you think it's easier to do the conference type of presentation than putting it together in an article? Because I too am in that camp.
That's going to end up now as a real-world answer, in that often this is driven by a conference deadline.
Yes. Yes.
And I guess many of us can do that quite quickly. And the other thing is, in the working at a university, we're used to doing this. So I think both of us are probably quite used to putting together a presentation.
Yes.
And it's driven by a deadline.
Yeah.
And so it gets done.
Is it driven by a number of PowerPoint slides and things like that?
There seems to be something completely different there about the purpose of the experience, doesn't it? Because, as you say, we're often asked to do things quite quickly, put an abstract in quite quickly, so you haven't got that, the paper written already often. And so that's when you produce quite easily, it feels like, the presentation, and then probably like you, Ian, I've come away thinking, oh, I wish I could turn that into something for publication.
What you could do is, for the presentation, have a handout, which is in more detail, or could be a copy of the paper that you're proposing, so you have more references and technical, and perhaps more tables and graphs and things like that, and your email address on it, so we know where it's come from. Useful to do that with posters as well.
Yes.
And better with posters and presentations, I would think, that you have a sheet of paper which gives more details and a contact address on it.
Actually, that does make quite a lot of sense, because I'm about to do a conference presentation and I'd quite like feedback on it before I get down to writing.
That's a delaying tactic.
Yeah, it's just one of the thoughts that had occurred to me, again, recently started on the online EdD programme, was that I'm being forced to be very public about my ideas and share my ideas now in writing, which I've never been before. Writing's always been something that feels you've been forced to do for an assignment, and it's often something that might just be shared with your tutor within an academic environment. I've done a couple of publications, but not really very much experience. The EdD has really had to force me to come out of what is a comfort zone, I think, from writing privately into sharing those ideas publicly. So I am hoping that that experience will help me then take the next leap, which feels like moving it into some sort of publication. That's what I'm hoping I'll get out of it.
All right.
And I think writing is a very private sort of thing somehow. You do it on your own. Everybody says you should share it, you should get other people to comment on it before you submit and all this kind of thing. I'm afraid to say I don't do that very much. I do sometimes when it's with these colleagues when we're all working together on it. We have to send it round to each other, and that's good. But if I'm just writing it on my own, I think, oh well, I know more about this than anybody else, so I won't bother to share it. I send it off, kind of thing.
If you're relatively new, would you advise people to start by collaborating or to have a go on your own to start with?
Depend on the person, I suspect. But suppose it was a student and you were wanting to encourage them to write something and publish their work, this kind of thing. They would have submitted a thesis or a project outline, and I might say, this looks good, would you like to see if we can turn it into an article? And then you have to start thinking about where you would send it and what it's appropriate for.
It sounds like that one of the very first steps is the journal, finding the journal.
Yes. A student brought me something to read yesterday, and I read it, and it was very long, and I couldn't see what it was for. So I said, is this for a journal article? Is it for a book chapter? Is it part of a report on the whole project that you've been researching on? So who's it for?
Yes.
Because who is it for constrains its length more than anything else. I mean, it obviously the topic is important, all the rest of it. But if you decide on the journal, then the journal will have short articles maybe, medium-sized ones, maybe a long review, not often, that kind of thing. But they will say, limit 6,000 words. Well, this person has written about 30,000.
Right.
So, and she had a huge number of visuals, because it was about children's drawings. Well, they were lovely, but you would only be able to get about 2 or 3 in the journal. You could say there's more available at home, as it were. So thinking where you're writing it for and who you're writing it for, I think, is very important.
But in that sense, it sounds like for all of us, we should be conscious of the journals that we're reading from, thinking of writing to them at the same time, which is, I must admit, something I'd not kind of thought of before, or thought of it like that before.
I was thinking exactly the same, thinking about that relationship between the reading and the writing.
And the journals will all have an author's guide sheet which you can print off. And some of these are very irritating. The detail, the typography and the size of the print and how you do the references, which drives everybody crackers. But they don't tell you much about how to write the topic. If you look at the journal, you can see how they use, whether they use tables or not, graphs, what sort of size articles, again.
Do you write every day, Jim?
Oh, yes.
Do you?
Sundays, Saturdays too.
So even
Sundays I sometimes take off, yes.
Okay.
But I write at the university, though, so I go in to write. I go in early, because you can't park your car if you don't go in early. And I will work perhaps till 11 or so, writing, dealing with correspondence and writing various bits and pieces. And then, because I'm retired, which is the research professor's a posh name for retired, I don't have a lot of other commitments, so I can then write on something else. So I usually try to write on something every day, not necessarily the same thing. So I have slightly spinning tops. So that's spinning, and you go.
Your plate spinning.
Yes, that's it, and you do that every day, and that keeps them all alive and in your head, kind of thing. Whereas if you just do one, and then you send it off, you sort of think, oh, what shall I do now? But, so I keep a list as well of things which might be of interest to write on. I see something and I think, oh, that's interesting. I could do something on that. I'll put it on the list. But it doesn't always get done. But it's sometimes fun to go down the list and see what you've not done that you said you were going to do or thought you'd do.
That's what I was wondering about. It sounds like you've got lots and lots of ideas about what you want to write, and I think I'm developing a list of ideas of what I want to write about. When it sounds like you strategically are working through your list, and I have never thought about that. I'm often driven by need to write as opposed to something that takes my interest.
Well, it's not quite as mechanical as that, because I might come up with an idea which was not on the list and think, ooh, and set off.
Right.
The trouble is, everybody's different. So, but I did bring an example of a printout of on screen, and it started off with a title which was "Where Have All the Tables Gone?" And it's about the fact that in psychology magazines there's no tables or figures, whereas in the more prestigious ones there are.
Yes.
And it's a sort of sign of science. The more graphs you've got, the better kind of thing. And I've tried to publish in these journals, and when I've put tables in them, they've taken them out.
Right.
I'm very annoyed about that. So that was the idea. I was going to have a go at these journals and write something for them.
Jim, one of the things that I'm really interested in when you were speaking was the title that you've got for your article or potential article just there. What do you think about titles in general? Because sometimes they're incredibly boring, and sometimes they sound quite interesting but don't tell you anything. So how do you go about shaping a title?
Well, there are lots of different kinds of titles, and I think you have to choose one which is appropriate to the kind of piece you're doing. So Where Have All the Tables Gone is a fun sort of, and it's built on a song really, and but it's done to attract the reader. But that's for that kind of piece. Now, I wouldn't do a PhD thesis entitled "Where Have All the Tables Gone?"
Right.
It would be interesting, but you would be frowned upon. So you have to choose a title which is appropriate to the kind of text you're writing. And in this book of mine, there's a list of 13 types of title.
Oh, okay.
So there's all sorts, really. The most common academic one is probably with a colon.
Yes.
Something using colons in titles, a meta-analysis or something. And that's very common in the social sciences and studies, not so common in science journals. There's recently been a lot of research on the effects of different kinds of titles on citation rates and things like that. Now that you've got computers to do all the counting, they can count thousands of titles and thousands of citation rates and see if there's any relationship. What you find is that titles with colons are a bit longer, as you would expect, because you're getting 2 chunks at it. But it doesn't seem to have much effect on citation rates. But they only occur in certain disciplines. So titles with colons might not be common at all in, say, an arts discipline or something like that.
Sure.
Titles with questions I quite like for articles. But the ones I think are most useful to work towards are something that tells you what the paper is about.
Yes.
And is perhaps with some sort of qualification.
So in the social sciences, was there a clear correlation between a certain type of title and citation?
No, not really. All very small. And different investigators have found, some have found a slight relationship. The longer the title, the more it's going to be cited. But they're only talking about 2 words long or extra. So some have found that and some haven't.
Yes.
So it's an ongoing. Obviously it gets people very excited to be able to analyse thousands of things with the press of a button. But, so we'll get more on the effects of these things,
Okay. I'm interested in your reflective writing, because I have a feeling that if you keep that going through the duration of the programme, you'd have a really rich resource for looking at later on.
Yeah, it's my hope at the moment is that out of my reflections will emerge what I want to look at for and investigate further for the thesis. That's what I'm hoping. So I do use the reflective log, the learning log, really. I write in it probably every day or at least every other day. And I've got better analysis within it, so it's not just description. I'm trying to analyse what I'm learning about as well. So I am trying to track some themes out of that. But I'm also conscious that in itself there's a lot of words already, and whether I could move that into already start to think how I could use that practically to put a publication together.
Well, there are journals that focused on reflection, so I'm certain that you could.
You could write a reflective log on your reflective log.
Yes. Or write it about the experience of learning to write within an online programme, because that's not something I thought about before I started the programme, was about the skill of writing publicly.
That would be very helpful, because I don't know anybody who's done that, you see, and people have probably all got this worry, and it would be nice to read something about it.
So what keeps people writing, Jim? What helps you when you get stuck?
Get
when
a job. I don't know. How do you keep going?
How do you keep motivated? How do you...
Well, in my experience, it's based on these sort of notions of if you try to do something regularly every day, so it becomes a habit, and you reward yourself for doing it. Like if I finish this chapter, I can go to the cinema on Saturday, but if I don't, I can't. And then you get on. These sort of things, there are techniques that people say. Things like, if you're writing an article in sections, don't stop at the end of a section. Stop at the beginning of the next section. So that when you pick it up, you go straight on. You don't stop and think, oh, I must polish it, I haven't got it right yet. You go back up rather than keep going. So there are tools that people offer. For me, it's just a habit. I come in and I start. I mean, and I feel deprived if I don't do it. So, but then I'm an exception, and people are very rude to me about it. Get a life, they say.
Sounds like it is your life, though.
If I can just turn that back for those of us who are, really, how do I put this? Really busy doing other stuff, lots of other things. I've just recently read that doing 30 minutes a day as a habit, because when you said 2 hours, I thought, that's not happening.
No.
But when I read the 30 minutes, I thought, actually, I could probably do that. And I wondered what your view was on that short chunks of writing.
Oh, yes. Better than nothing. Wow. You have 2 or 3 pages at the end of it, which you wouldn't have if you sat there thinking, oh, I can't be bothered, or I've got this to do and I must finish that.
Sure.
It's a question of prioritising, I suppose. And sometimes, marking exam scripts has to take priority. But again, since I don't do that anymore, it's easier for me.
Do you write most days, Ian?
Real answer? No. No. Again, I'm back to the conference thing. If I'm driven by a conference, then I do. And then that gets sent off, and then I get busy doing something else. I mean, it's clearly for me, one of the challenges is to get that habit in place, whether or not there's an external driver.
Not just one piece.
So I did actually like that spinning plates idea, because I've not done that before, and I will do that.
And for me, beginning with the end in mind, I know that's a Stephen Covey saying, with that. But it's I think what I'm going to take away from these conversations is about having some end point as well, knowing where I want to target it, because I probably I've already got those plates spinning, and they're spinning and they're spinning and they're spinning, and I need to now know somewhere where to go with them, because that's my worry, that I have a computer full of writing and that just stays with me in my computer.
But you actually could learn things from the writing, you see. I mean, when I started off this Where Have All the Tables Gone, I was going to write a rude article about The Psychologist, which is the journal concerned, which has a very curious editorial policy about not publishing tables and data. It calls itself a magazine, and therefore we don't have original articles, so therefore they're all sort of chatty sort of things. But I then started to look at the several other house magazines for psychologists, a couple in the States at least, and they're the same. So now it's a more interesting question now. It's not just this magazine that's at fault. It's a problem of the paradigm of what is appropriate for a particular kind of journal in psychology. Counting things is a wonderful way of finding out what goes on. Simply, well, there's 5 of those, there's 7 of those. 15 of them. You know, you haven't noticed until you actually sit down and count.
Yeah.
Counting's wonderful.
So you've ended up in a different place than you thought when you set out.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's probably true of quite a lot of what I read about. Yeah, some things turn out to be unexpected. The things that you thought would be different turn out not to be, and things like that. Once you start looking at it, and people make all sorts of assumptions and say things which are actually sometimes true, but often not.
Yes. Yeah.
There's more variety in it.
I think that's a challenge. Although technology is wonderful, there is so much potential reading material out there now, isn't there? And you could go off and read and read and read
Yes.
and read about something, but it's being disciplined about
Focusing your reading.
Yeah. That's another challenge, but it feels like it's important in order to end up with a piece of writing that is saying what you want it to say.
What do you think the tension is then between, in a sense, writing for an academic journal and attempting to write in a more accessible and readable way?
Quite big, really. I mean, I've not tried to write a novel, but some academics do, and we did think about exploring what they did and how they went about it, and what the differences were between writing a paper and novel. It got too complex. The kind of stuff you do in a novel is very different, and it didn't work as a, let's take these people who do both and see what they say about it, because they would write reams. Sort of the populariser kind of notion.
Well, even within a journal,
Yes.
I mean, some of the stuff is just really dense,
Yes,
and
yes.
and even if you know the field, it's dense, and it's a bit about how can we make our writing fit a genre, but actually still be a bit more readable.
Well, it's a bit more like turning it into speech. It's a bit more getting away from the passives and the past tenses and the long sentences and shortening it and using, in psychology, using I and we instead of they, and it was done. And using words like participants rather than subjects. You know, there's a level of language which the high-powered journals use,
Yes.
which is not really appropriate for understanding it. Well, says me.
Yeah.
You could go too far the other way.
Yes.
I asked the person in the corridor whether she thought academic writing was mainly done by men or women, and she said men. Bang. But that's basically what I'm trying to get at. And so there are various rules or suggestions. Sentences shouldn't be more than, let's say, 30 words long.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how difficult that can be. Using personal pronouns, keeping it in the present, measuring the stuff as readability measures on most people's work processes, keeping it above a readability level of 40 if you can. And the Flesch scale, and it's a bit technical, Flesch scale goes from 0 to 100. And 0 is impossible to read, and 100 is very easy to read.
Yes.
And it's not really meant for scholarly text, but it's used a lot. And academic articles come out at about 30. The abstracts are a bit, they say 25, and the introduction's about 30, and the method 32 or something like that. So it's not the same for each section, but the average is 30, which is not very good. I started to try and say, well, I want to get mine up to 50. It's very hard to do it.
And that's a really nice point, Ian, because a lot of the reading that I've been guided towards, and equally would guide my undergraduate students towards, are about techniques to improve your writing, so making it clear and understandable. And then there is some paradox then when you go to an academic journal and pick it up, you have to be prepared to put it down several times to go away and have a cup of tea and come back to the next part and try and make sense of it. So is it that you have then got to move into that culture and style of writing to be accepted?
Yes.
That's
Well, you do want it accepted,
if you
don't
want
you?
it accepted.
Yeah.
So if your writing is readable and easy to understand, is that going to be automatically rejected by because it is too easy to understand?
Well, I would err on the aim of getting it easy to understand.
Okay.
But I can say that as a
Yeah.
retired person. When I was writing something that I found it difficult to explain, I used to say, now, how would I explain this to my mother, who was not a psychologist, knew nothing about what you're doing? And I found writing out what you would tell your mother as to what you were doing was infinitely easier to understand than trying to put this in pompous academic prose. But, as you say, you run into difficulties. In this book, there's some examples from referees' reports, and they're about my writing. This one says, articles in this journal are not typically written in the first person. Whilst this may make the manuscript somewhat more accessible for some readers, it is not appropriate for a formal professional journal such as this one. In addition, the tone of the manuscript is far too informal. Reject. Right. Second referee. This is an exceptional paper. It is 40 years since the one occasion on which I listened to Jim Hartley's voice, and I cannot recall how he sounded. Yet in this paper, the writer speaks out to the reader quite personally, while at the same time conveying useful information, findings and thinking in a scholarly, rigorous and academic manner. This is a rare talent.
Okay.
Right.
I get that quite a lot as another example there.
Which one did you accept, Jim?
Well, no, the article's submitted,
Right.
and the editor comes back and says, we will publish it,
Okay.
but do see if you can take into account the comments of the referees. Where one says reject and the other says accept.
Yeah.
You're in a difficult position, but if the editor said he's going to accept it, you're all right.
Right.
Yeah.
But if they say, the referees disagree, could you take a look at it and we will reconsider it? You're in, so you make modest adjustments here and there, basically.
Yeah.
But that's not the most common thing you get from referees. They're more onto the details of what you've been writing about. But writing it in the way I write things, a lot of people object to. So I don't recommend it for new students, really, or PhD students, or you doing it, unless it goes to a journal that these days is more likely to have that kind of article in it. If you find it, all it is in the past and the passives and third persons, there's no point in sending something to it.
Sure.
When you're beginning your career, anyway.
Okay.
We're back again to know your journal, aren't we?
Know your journal, know your readership, yes.
And also, I think something there about you are, again, we've been looking at the role of imitation within learning. So it feels like your message there is that imitation is maybe where you're starting out, and as your career and professional expertise develops within writing, and your second reviewer clearly knew of you in that instance. So you have a track record. So as your track record develops, you can then influence your style, and maybe that emerges more because you've got a track record.
Yes.
It feels like as you're starting out, you have got to look at your journal, imitate, look at the style.
Yes, see how things are done. Read a lot, and things you like, copy. And I find listening to radio broadcasts is very good. Points of view in the Sunday morning. 10-minute essay by somebody famous, and they're a masterpiece to listen to, and if you can copy that in your writing, it's amazing.
Well, thank you both very much. I must say it's been a pleasure for me to take part in this, because I've got 2 or 3 clear ideas that I can do, because I've picked up the word do from that, and some specifics that kind of fit underneath that will help me with my writing. So thank you very much, and thank you, Michaela, for adding heaps to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm not sure I want to say thank you to you for giving me more work to do, but there's so many, I think, practical things I'm going to take away. Those plate spinning ideas, and I think it is about habit and looking now at places where I can potentially submit something to. I think that's my do. My real action point is finding now the outlets, really, to put something into.
Yeah.
That feels like a key message for me.
Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed doing this enormously. I think they should do a second edition.
And read your book.
Yeah. Oh, I have to write another one.
Yeah. No, thank you, Jim. Thanks for sharing your
Pleasure.
experience.
Thank you.